The Indian Claims Commission was formed to resolve Indian land claims, and if appropriate, determine the value, the area taken, and authorize payment for the lands taken. Tribes had to prove sole occupancy and dominion over the lands, a very high bar. You could not and would not be paid for somebody else's land. You had to be. This land had to be under your dominion. We, unfortunately at that time, we did not have the Vancouver Treaty Council notes. Otherwise, our lands would have been greatly expanded. Instead of stopping at the Lewis River, our lands that we were compensated for would run right to the shores of the Columbia River. And our federal recognition process would have been accelerated as well. So the Land Claims Commission, it was a panel of federal judges. Their finding for us was in a court docket called Docket 218. That determined the amount of land that the Cowlitz had, roughly an area a little bit greater than the Gifford Pinchot Forest, roughly from modern White Pass Highway down to the Lewis River. And again, the federal government, this finding was appealed and went through the full adjudication process. And my next question is, did it lead to federal recognition? Well, in 1974, I was a rookie tribal council member. I thought Docket 218 was going to give us a shortcut. After all, the government had recognized the owed Cowlitz money, and the tribe was going to be paid that money. But the government said, not so fast. Docket 218 is Indian tribal money. And in the eyes of the government, the Cowlitz had ceased to be an Indian tribe. So then we had to go into the federal recognition process. We had been in this. I believe it's fair to say that Cowlitz started the quest for federal recognition under then our chief Antoine Stockham. If you're in the Skanewa lineage, he's Uncle Antoine. He was a son of Skanewa, and he was a Cowlitz headman by birth, appointed a chief by then Lieutenant Ulysses S. Grant in the 1850s. This man, I give credit for starting the federal recognition process. In the early days, in the 70s, there was no fixed process for federal recognition. It was a legal madhouse to where nationwide all the tribes watched. And if a tribe made recognition, then we would all go to court and try and prove that we were just like that tribe, so we should get recognized too, because we're just like them. And of course, no two tribes were ever alike, and their situations were never alike. And this process was so helter-skelter and inconsistent, very few tribes were successful, and our tribe grew weary. 100+ years of the struggle for federal recognition had taken a toll. Our tribe almost dissolved. Tribal Council, with the help of Dr. Stephen Beckham and Dennis Whittlesey, an attorney, carefully reviewed and perfected all of our submissions to a new group, BAR, Bureau of Acknowledgement and Recognition. This was a bureau set up to help streamline the federal recognition process. Everyone would play on a level field, all of the rules would be the same, and we would end up, everyone had a better chance at this recognition. We, the Cowlitz, because nothing come easy for us, we intentionally delayed. We were not first in line. We could have been, but we wanted to see what the obstacles were, what the government's reaction were to the first recognition petitions. We intentionally sat out for a couple of years. Though we were ready, we thought, that we chose to sit out and wait and see what this process went. We would send a submission to the bar people, and if challenged, we could add more information. But too often, there was no answer at all, just silence. You can't appeal silence. You can't argue with silence. And the silence wouldn't tell us if we were approved or ejected. Silence is really tough to deal with. We knew so much was at risk. We had one chance to get it right. Our failure would leave Cowlitz forever unrecognized. This is the closest I could tell a non-Indian is that imagine you're a lawyer and you have a client on death row. If you fail, their execution happens this evening because you failed. And those of us that were in this, we took this deeply seriously and with a great deal of, we were really aware. We would wait months for bar to respond only to have them ask another question, which was okay, because now we're moving a step forward. It was those sometimes months long. I think we went maybe 18 months after a submission with no response. I mean, we would ask, did they even get it? They wouldn't even say, yeah, we've heard you. But anyway, we had to provide bar with the following that would be upheld when it was appealed in a federal court. And yes, our case was appealed repeatedly. Cowlitz must be descended from the Aboriginal peoples. The government had told us, you cannot be a tribe, you're not Indians. Cowlitz first had to prove that our native lineage from earliest contact to current times. Birth, marriage, baptism, and death records were submitted for review. The Bureau of Indian Affairs genealogists spent years reviewing and scrutinizing the family lineages and documented to verify that tribal members were the lineal descendants of the Aboriginal people. Cowlitz must have continuously exercised governance over the people. In other words, to be a tribe, you have to have continuous leadership. Bar charged Cowlitz had failed to govern continuously through the early 1900s. We were able to disprove this challenge with the work of Mike Iyall and his efforts on Cowlitz recognition in Congress. Frank's work proved that there was no lapse in continuity of the tribal government. The Cowlitz recognition bill passed Congress only to be vetoed by President Calvin Coolidge. The president did not want to pay Cowlitz for their lands. This was well documented in Cowlitz and tribal records and congressional records. And one thing I should point out to people is that early on, Cowlitz had learned the importance of keeping and maintaining paper records. We have literally probably into the tons of paper records that we saved. And because of that, yeah, they're not all well organized, but we had an incredible amount of material. Then Cowlitz must have been continuously recognized as a tribe by cities, counties, state, and government records. We used the thousands of examples with Cowlitz communications with local and federal governments to prove this. This was documented both in tribal records, newspapers, and correspondence with government officials. We had learned early in this that you save your paper, and we did. Cowlitz must have an independent homeland. Without proof of a Cowlitz homeland, you will not be an independent tribe, and there would be no federal recognition and no reservation. Cowlitz would never be an Indian tribe in the eyes of the U.S. government. Fortunately for us, the Indian Claims Commission was the final step to settle our claims, and they affirmed our land in that Docket 218. And we used that Docket 218 land claims as a definition of our homeland. I will tell you that when I suggested that on council, I was shouted down, because the challenge is that you really only get to exercise your sovereignty on your documented homelands. And many people said, Mike, we will not be able to hunt anywhere else. We will not be able to fish anywhere else. And my point is that Docket 218 had been thoroughly adjudicated and needed no further proof. The Docket 218's land decision avoided potential boundary disputes with neighboring tribes. I used to say our neighbors had big feet, and they liked having our space. Those boundary disputes that would have resulted would have delayed or perhaps even permanently blocked any decision on Cowlitz recognition. So by settling for this thoroughly documented and adjudicated land, we were able to move past that one piece. For us, the Cowlitz federal recognition was a 150-year struggle. Cowlitz passed all the tests and survived the legal appeals. On February 14, 2000, the U.S. Department of Interior, Bureau of Indian Affairs, acknowledged the Cowlitz tribe. The government determined in our recognition case was so strong that it proved the Cowlitz tribe had always met the standards for recognition. There are nationwide, you will see many tribes that got reorganized, became confederated, became many things. But our tribe was acknowledged as, and what acknowledged meant, John Barnett used to explain it this way: the government found that we always had met the standards for federal recognition. The government just finally acknowledged it. Then I continue. The Secretary of Interior, notice is hereby given. The United States Department of Interior acknowledges that the Cowlitz tribe exists as a tribe of American Indians within the meaning of federal law. We were acknowledged because generations of Cowlitz families would not quit. After federal acknowledgement, we began the fight for a reservation. That reservation fight lasted for 15 years. Unlike many tribes, our recognition did not come with substantial lands and monies to build and establish health and housing services for our people. It would be up to us to build those services. I have to tell you that today, it feels so good to be able to say that I was there when we finished that 150-year struggle. To know that so many generations of Cowlitz people, when Frank, my grandfather, was going to D.C., they would take up a collection. And in our pile of papers, that I jokingly call the Cowlitz archives, one of our people, Nathan Reynolds, found a piece of yellow scratch paper showing how much money was collected to send Frank to Washington, D.C. $3 and change. In 1920s, that wasn't a lot of money, but I explained to people it might have been all the cash in the room. You know, we were not wealthy people. And I do know that when Frank was back in D.C., he lived small. It was not high on the hog. He had a sympathetic congressman that let him sleep on his couch at night. Frank would use the congressional washrooms. He would sleep in the congressman's office at night, and he would eat in the cafeterias and wherever he could. This was, you know, for me, this was really important, that 150 years of Cowlitz people, not one of them dropped the ball. Enough of us kept that continuity going that we made it. Now I move on to another prompt. Following federal recognition, Cowlitz immediately landed back into litigation by the opponents who tried to reverse the federal recognition approval. What happened? Well, we spent 1,000 days in the 90-day appeal period, and the process finally determined that we had been successful in proving our case, and it was supported. So immediately our opposition, tribal governments, local governments, and neighboring casinos spent tens of millions of dollars to block the establishment of our reservation. It was, I guess we expected some opposition. One of the groups was so arrogant that they published their budget meetings, and they set aside money in $1 million blocks, and we would see how much they were going to spend to fight us. And fortunately, we won that fight. The next prompt, in the governmental body of the Cowlitz tribe, you became director of the new Natural Resources Department. Well, with federal recognition, the Cowlitz tribe had many interests to protect. I was asked to found and be the director of the Natural Resources Department. We hired staff, and the staff worked with me to establish ways to protect the resources of our traditional homelands. We applied for grants and partnered with state and federal agencies to implement projects that would preserve and protect fish, wildlife, and habitat. I can tell you that we, the Cowlitz tribe, hardly had a penny to spend on this. Almost everything we got from grants. And grants are easy to get for habitat purchase and preservation. You cannot get a grant for legal money. So we couldn't do anything in court. We were powerless on that. We could lobby, and that was all we could do. So today, I'm really proud that successor, I retired from that Natural Resources Department in 2008. That Natural Resources Department continues, and today they bring in $3 to $4 million in habitat restoration money. That's substantial. They are the powerhouse of the Lower Columbia River, and it is still done with grant money. Can you explain an item described as the Vancouver Treaty Council? The Vancouver Treaty Council was an attempt to reach an agreement with only the Cowlitz people. Proposed treaties required that the Cowlitz move away from their homeland, give up their way of life, and abandon their ancestors' graves. That's a terrible price. My brother Bill found a note on the Vancouver Treaty Council in an obscure book. This footnote would become the foundation for the Cowlitz Fee to Trust, our reservation case. Nathan Reynolds, Cowlitz ecologist, found a state library microfilm number that referred to the Vancouver Treaty Council notes and sent me on a search mission. After 2 days of searching, I found and copied the notes. I brought them back to the Longview office. It's important to know that if you ever go to the archives in the state library, those microfilms are in trays. Each tray has perhaps 100 rolls of microfilm in it. And I'm really good at scanning stuff. I could scan an entire roll in maybe 10 hours. 100 rolls at 10 hours, that's 1,000 hours of work. Fortunately, I had been chatting with the research librarian up there, and he said, "What you looking for, Mike?" And I told him, Not in that drawer, it's in this drawer. I would have spent literally 6 months, full time, looking for it. We found it. And it is so beautifully crystal clear, the Vancouver Treaty Council notes. The penmanship is atrocious. William Tappan's handwriting is just everybody's way of getting even with me for my own terrible penmanship. And in here, Governor Stevens, Isaac Stevens says to the Cowlitz leadership, I acknowledge your claims to these lands. He continues, they value Cowlitz most and would part with it last. It's difficult to explain the incredible synchronicity of this. This statement has almost no value 5 miles south, 5 miles north. It's specific to that one beautiful piece of land that is our reservation. It's like incredible. I know I told our DC attorney, I said, Cowlitz was a prairie at that time, and when you are on our reservation, you're either standing at the edge of that prairie or you can see it. Prairies weren't always that finely defined. And so I took this finding back to our tribal enrollment officer, Nancy Osborne. She reviewed the names of the people attending the Vancouver Treaty Council and confirmed they were Cowlitz leaders. I showed the Vancouver Treaty Council notes to Chairman John Barnett, and he said, don't tell a soul. He knew these notes. Governor Stevens saying, I acknowledge your claim to these lands. Stevens adding, they value Cowlitz most and would part with it last, would be crucial to our reservation case. We kept these Vancouver Treaty Council notes confidential until the tribe used them as a foundation for our reservation case that resulted in the restored lands ruling. Indeed, we had proven a historic connection to those lands. Today, our reservation is located at Cowlitz, a prairie. Federal courts agreed with the Cowlitz and ruled that our lands qualified as restored. We had made that historic connection. We had proven it. This ruling was appealed and finally upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court in 2017. It took the Cowlitz people generations and over 170 years to get where we are today, and we have only started. Tan asks one more question. Do you think it would have made a difference in your petition to be federally recognized if we would have had the Vancouver Treaty Council notes? And my answer is, yeah, I think it would have. Our leaders were the only people at that Vancouver Treaty Council, and it would have confirmed the government's acknowledgement of us as a tribe. When our case was in court, a federal judge would tell an opposition attorney, you acknowledged them, the Cowlitz, when you met with them. He had made the foolish error of trying to confuse a federal judge with jurisdiction and acknowledgement, because our court case was twofold. The court case was first a historic connection to our reservation, and then because there was a second court case called Carcieri, some people call it Kacheri, that challenged the government and their ability to take land into trust. And a beautiful piece of that was one of the Supreme Court justices, his opinion said was, the critical phrase was now under jurisdiction. And fortunately, our DC attorney and I, we both agreed on what what does jurisdiction mean? Jurisdiction, and the federal courts later agreed with this, is the power to exercise governance over. So we had to prove that the government had exercised governance over us continuously. And because we're Cowlitz, the people that save paper, and we spent lots of time communicating with the government. Now, an exercise of governance doesn't mean, oh, I agree with everything you've always said. No. It means if they hear and respond to your letters, they call them pleadings. If they hear your pleadings and deny them, that's an exercise of governance. If they quietly threw them into the waste paper basket, we'd have nothing. But fortunately, the government loved to tell us no. And so we have lots of records of them telling us no. And each time they did, it helped build our case. So with that, thank you.